Okay, so here we are, just right before Madame du Châtelet is born. Her father is very well placed at Versailles, in the court of Louis XIV. So, Versailles is quite the place, and you should definitely take some time to explore it on the map. Here's a picture I have of the court of Versailles, and it was Louis XIV was um, known for being involved in courtly politeness, courtly ritual, and that being a very central part of life in France at the time. And Emily du Châtelet's father was placed in one of the utilitarian offices, so he wasn't simply a member of the court who was given here's a just for fun title. He was a working part of Louis XIV's government. Emily du Châtelet was born in Paris, and probably while her father was in town to be in the court of Versailles. And she is later, when she's 16, presented at Versailles at court. So this is not something that, you know, that even every member of the aristocracy wasn't allowed to be presented at court, but she is presented at court. It is, I think, the quintessential Western civilization palace. I don't think there's anything quite like Versailles that I've ever heard of in Western civilization. It is unbelievably huge and incredibly ornate. All right, so she's born in Paris, but she doesn't, her family has many estates throughout France, and here is one of her childhood homes. So let's take a look at what it was like growing up. And this is a picture of her from childhood. There are many paintings of her because she came from a very wealthy family. So this is what the childhood home of Emily du Châtelet was like. And when you look at this, and there's a little pinpoint that says the childhood home, you might think it's one of these, but no, the childhood home of Emily du Châtelet was this, all of this. So all of this is part of Chateau d'Azay-le-Ferron, which I'm terrible at, but it's quite something. So switch to the new photos layer. I don't know what that is. All right, so Google is changing. All right, so there's quite something going on there. So that is what a childhood home of hers was like. All right. Oh, we're missing. I'm going to pause because we're missing parts of this. I'm going to go back and see if I can recover them. Okay, so here's a picture of her when she was 16. If you click on that presented back at court, it's just back at the Palace of Versailles. But this is a picture of her when she was presented at court at 16. And notice that even in this portrait painted of her at the time, she was seen reading a book. And that one of the reasons to do this was very smart to do, is that these pictures were sometimes used to find suitors. So it's very clever of her to be seen pictured with a book, because anyone who was interested in marrying Emily du Châtelet really needed to know that this is a woman who expects to be able to read. She loves to read, and so she's pictured in that way. So she's married 3 years later after she's presented at court. She's married at 19. Her husband is much older than she is, and she has to go out to the estate, her husband's estate from Paris. So it's quite a ways from Paris, especially when you think about, this would be a plane ride today, but in her time, it's, with wagons and things. All right, and this is her husband's estate. I guess we have lost the panoramic things during the time of this class. The panoramic videos have gone, or things have gone away, but you can still take your little Google Earth guy and drag him down here, and you can be in the city in the 3D kind of thing. And so this is part of the castle where she would have stayed when she was 19. And it's huge and very castle-like. One of the duties of her husband was military. He was expected to protect these areas. So he had duties with his high status, and he did have higher status than her family did. So even though her father was well placed in the court, she marries someone, a baron, and she now has once she is married and becomes the baroness, she is allowed to be seated in the queen's presence. So she has other privileges in her aristocratic role as that. Sometime later, after she's met Voltaire, they go to a different one of her husband's houses, which is the Chateau de Circe, and this is where she lived with Voltaire. And it is importantly far away from Paris, because Voltaire is not a friend of the court. He's far away that people don't bother with him anymore, and he can live comfortably at the chateau. And her husband comes and visits when they are. It's not a secret that his wife is having an affair with Voltaire, but this is the home where they are. And this is the home where she dies. So some years later, after her affair with Voltaire had ended, she had another relationship and she was pregnant. And reportedly, she was working at her desk as a mathematician. She was working at her desk when she went into labor. Something went wrong during or right after the labor related to childbirth, and she died. So in a way, she was really working on her mathematics and her science up until the very, very end. So that's our view of her. That's in the, so I'll upload this so you guys can take a look. I'll try to fix my spelling. So you guys can take a look at Du Châtelet's life and kind of explore that. But she has freedom and respectability in Paris that women in England, because of a different way the society was going, did not have to participate in scientific developments. So when Emily du Châtelet resolves this issue between Leibniz and his experiment, which I'll cover in the next little short video, and with Isaac Newton, it is listened to, it's heard. Her translation is still today one of the key translations that people use of Principia Mathematica, the one directly from her hand, directly translated according to her words and then printed off, is the best loved translation into French of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica. So she was a tremendously important woman in this time. It's important that we acknowledge that women, while being disadvantaged in sciences, in math and sciences, and held back in some cultures, there were also supportive men who very much respected them and helped them and all sorts of things. In France, we had a situation where the society was arranged so that women had a voice in the way that society was structured. However, we're going to see in our next unit, when we look at the Lavoisiers, both of them were very important in science. Both of them, they were a married couple. Unfortunately, Monsieur Lavoisier is going to lose his head in the French Revolution. And this has to do with part of the difference. Remember, in England, in the coffee houses, anyone from any layer of society could be given a voice and could be heard, as long as they were male, obviously. In France, women were given a voice, but people in different layers of society were not. And so admission into the French scientific societies was more restricted by the aristocratic classes. And this does become a problem. That and the wall around Paris, which you will hear about the wall around Paris from me until the end of this class, because it has so much to do with thermodynamics, and Monsieur Lavoisier. But the aristocratic gatekeeping into the salons, into the academic life, was a detriment in French society, and it is part of what lost Monsieur Lavoisier his head in the French Revolution. But that's for the next unit, which will start next week, and I will come right back with another video talking about the experiment.